typewriter, kind of bopping along in my life, I happened to turn on a television set one night and did a double take because there on the Nightline program was a thin, sickly, white-haired version of an old college professor of mine whom I had adored back in college and now was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. I had not spoken to him in 16 years since I had left college. I was too busy chasing after what I thought was the meaning of life, ambition, accomplishment, stacking up my achievements. I ended up going to see him in what I thought would be a one-time visit, and was so taken with how he was living his life, even though he was dying from this terrible disease, that I ended up flying home that night and saying, you know, you're 37 years old, you're perfectly healthy. He's 78 years old and he's dying, and he seems 10 times happier with his life than you are. What's the matter with this picture? And I began to go back, following Tuesday, the next Tuesday, the next Tuesday, and what turned out to be all the Tuesdays that this man, Morrie Schwartz, had left in his life to try to get the answer to that very simple question. What do we know when we're really looking death in the face that puts all of life into perspective? And wouldn't it be great to know that now, when we're young enough and healthy enough to do something about it? And Morrie and I began to talk, and we had these visits. And while I don't espouse to have the meaning of life, I can share with you two conversations that we had that may add up to it. One was early on in the process. I watched as other people came to visit Morrie. I wasn't the only one, and other people came in, but it always seemed after he'd been on television on the Nightline program that people were kind of nervous. There were people who really didn't know him very well, and they'd come with kind of a philosophy about how to talk to someone who was dying. And they'd stand outside his room and they'd say, okay, I'm going to tell him funny stories, show him pictures, nothing sad, nothing sad, nothing sad. They'd have this whole, approach. And then they'd go into his office, the door would close, and they'd come out an hour later in tears. But they'd be crying about their divorce, their love life, their job, their problems. And they say, well, I don't know what happened. I went in to try to cheer him up, and I started talking to him, but after about 5 minutes, he started asking me about my life, and I started telling him, he started asking me more. I started really telling him, the next thing I know, I was telling him everything. And I went in to try to comfort him, and I ended up being comforted by him. And I watched this happen, folks, so many times that finally I went in to Morrie and I said, I don't get it. If ever anyone has finally earned the right to say, let's not talk about your problems. Let's talk about my problems. It will be you. If ever anyone has earned the sentence, you think you got it bad. Look at me. I can't move. I need someone to carry me from place to place, to wipe my rear end, to wipe my tears, to turn my head so I can look at you. You've hit the mother lode of sympathy here, Morrie. Why don't you take advantage? And he looked at me as if I just stepped out of a spaceship, and he said, Mitch, why would I ever take from people like that? Taking just makes me feel like I'm dying. Giving makes me feel like I'm living. Giving makes me feel like I'm living. It is a profound little sentence. It also rhymes, so it's easy to remember. Fast forward to the final conversation that Morrie and I had. By this point, he was very weak. He was in bed, and he hated that. He always said, when you're in bed, you're dead. But he wasn't able to get to his study. And I went in to see him, and I kind of had a sense that this was going to be the last visit. And he asked to hold my hand. Physical touch was so important. And he said to me, I want to ask you a favor. Okay, anything. After I'm dead, I want you to come visit me at my grave. Okay, I said I was going to do that anyhow. Not the way everybody else does. Don't drive in, leave the engine running, step out, put down some flowers, get back in. Come when you have some time. Bring a blanket. Bring some sandwiches. And plan on sticking around for a while. And I want you to talk to me about what's going on in your life, about your problems, what's happening in the world. And I said, wait a minute. You want me to come to a cemetery, have a picnic at your tombstone, and talk to the air. Exactly, he said. Just like we're talking now. And I said, well, Morrie, let's face it. It's not going to be like we're talking now, because you're not going to be able to talk back. And he looked at me as if I were being very naive, and he said, well, Mitch, I'll make you a deal. After I'm dead, you talk, and I'll listen. I laughed too. But a few weeks later, when Morrie passed away, and I sat down in my basement to write this book that was supposed to just help him pay his medical bills, supposed to be a tiny little book, I kept thinking back to that sentence, you talk, I'll listen. You talk, I'll listen. And I realized in that last little exchange was everything Morrie had been trying to teach me for all those Tuesdays, and everything I've tried to get across in any of the books I've written since. And it's very simple. If you lead your life as he did, making time for people, giving of yourself to people, sharing of yourself with other people, then when you're gone, you are not 100% gone. You live on inside the heads and hearts of everybody you touched. And they can talk to you after you're gone, not because they believe in seances or ghosts or something, but because you spent time putting your voice inside them. You gave them something to remember you by. It's like a penny in a piggy bank, right? When you take a penny and you put it inside a piggy bank, for all intents and purposes, the penny is gone forever, right? You can't see it anymore. Might as well be dead. The penny is gone. But you take the piggy bank and you can still hear it. This is how, as Morrie said, death ends a life, but not a relationship. But you must invest in those relationships if you want them to go on after you're gone. So, if you spend all day working, as I've spent far too many of my days, if you spend all day at the gym trying to get buff or in front of the makeup mirror trying to be beautiful, if you spend all day trying to get on the list of this or that, top 100, top 50, top 10 magazine cover, then when you die, you better plan on being 100% dead. Dead with a capital D. Because your money, no matter how much you have, they're just going to fight over after you're gone. They always do. Your beautiful body, no matter how buff, is going to rot in the ground right next to the fat guy. You know? Your list of accomplishments, no matter how impressive, will pale in comparison to some next hotshot who comes along. But the one thing that you have, the one thing that you had that makes you distinctly you, the voice that is a sum of everything you've seen and you've learned and you've loved and you've experienced and you've known, that voice that's inside you that separates you from everybody you're sitting next to in here and everybody on the planet, that voice, you didn't spend any time giving away. You were too busy taking to feel alive. So if you want to cheat death, you want to have a sense of meaning, a little bit of immortality, it is not in how big a stock portfolio you amass. It is not in your long list of accomplishments. I believe it is in every small act of kindness that you share with another human being that makes a memory and affects them. You're on the phone, you're talking to a friend or a relative, they're chewing your ear off, and you hang up the phone and say, oh, if I had that hour back, I really could do something. You did something. You did something right there. You gave of yourself. You listened. That is something. Not every something has to come with a paycheck at the end of it. Most of the worthwhile somethings in life do not. One life touches another, and touches another. This is how we affect the world. And if you don't think that that's true, or you think that's just a corny way for your last corny speaker to wrap up his corny talk, then look around. Why are you here? Why are you listening to me now? You don't know me. You didn't know Morrie Schwartz. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He didn't have a reality show. He was just a nice old man who in his dying days took one day a week to try to affect a student that he had once taught, who he kept in his heart. And as a result, I wrote a small book to try to help him pay his medical bills. And somebody read it, passed it on to somebody, and passed it on to somebody, and passed it on to somebody. Now look how large his classroom has grown for a man who isn't even around to teach it. Morrie Schwartz never read a single word of Tuesdays with Morrie. But his thoughts and his philosophies are taught in schools around the world. You never know the ripple that you are causing in that pond with that little stone of kindness that you share with somebody else. I wrote a book that just came out called The Timekeeper. And in it, Father Time comes back to earth to teach two people what the true meaning of time is about. And one of them is an old rich tycoon who isn't satisfied with the days he's had here on earth, even though he's had a long life. He can't imagine the world without him in it. And so he decides he's going to freeze himself before he dies so he can come back in a few hundred years and live all over again. And Father Time says to him, you can't do that. There is a reason God limits your days. The old man is perplexed. What could possibly be the reason? And Father Time says, to make each one of them precious. There is a reason we don't live forever. If we did, nothing would matter. It's the fact that you have to choose what you're going to do with each day. That is the beautiful, ironic, tragic, and yet, I think, majestic arithmetic of life. Each day we have is precious. Once you realize that, I tend to think that the chase for the meaning of life gets reversed and it sort of finds you. Thank you very much for listening to me tonight and all of our speakers.